Anybody in here have lower back pain before? Any lower back pain sufferers? All right, so I see I got some fellow lumbar sufferers in the room. So I used to have back pain so bad that sometimes I would feel it down into my hamstrings. And there would be days where I'd wake up screaming and writhing in pain, and there'd be nights where it'd be the same thing, a struggle, the frustration of my back constantly hurting. And then there would be periods where I'd be totally fine, where I'd be running around, riding bikes, doing all of that cool stuff until I would do something stupid like throw out my back folding the fucking blanket. Who throws out their back folding a blanket? Or I would throw out my back doing something stupid like stepping off a curb wrong. Who throws out their back stepping off a curb wrong? And I would go through this cycle time and time again over the course of the years. And so what changed? I started strengthening my core, and I need a clicker for that. And so as it turns out, glutes, hip flexors, hamstrings, all that good stuff, it's all connected. And for years, I've been neglecting all of these surrounding muscle groups. Thank you. I've been neglecting all of these surrounding muscle groups so much that my back was working overtime to hold it all together. And so while it felt like my back was actually the problem, it was not my back. It was a whole lot of other stuff. And so I share this because sometimes we know there's an issue, but we don't want to do the work to get to the root of it because we know it's going to be hard, and we know it's going to be challenging. And we'll be fine for a while, but eventually, in some form or another, we break down because avoidance never dissolves the issue. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how I've navigated my career and how I've made some of these decisions to ultimately get to a point where I'm working at a place like Google. But I'm also going to talk to you about the other work that you need to do. Because no dollar amount, job title, promotion is going to bring you the happiness or the freedom that you're looking for. But this other work will. And so your career is a tool. It's a tool to help you get more of what you want out of life. So maybe that's the opportunity to travel to other offices so you can see and live in different companies. Maybe it's the opportunity to pick up skills so you can say F the day job and go start your own thing. Maybe it's the peace of mind that comes with a steady job and benefits so you have the mental space to spend time with the people you love. For me, my day job was why I was able to become debt-free in 2018 after a bunch of horrible decisions. My day job is why I was able to take an exquisite European vacation with Boobokins that culminated in an elevated experience in Amsterdam. I don't know why y'all laughing. And my career is why I'm on this stage giving you this talk today. And yes, I did call her Boobokins. But this tool is hard to leverage if you don't know who you are, where you're going, and why. I know you've heard several versions of this today, but let's talk about what that looks like in action. When you're not clear on these things, life is happening to you. You constantly feel like you're behind. You constantly feel like you're reacting. You might find yourself in situations where you're accepting things out of convenience as opposed to necessity or purpose. You might even find yourself in situations where you feel so stuck that you don't know what to do to even get yourself out of the situation that you're in. And there's a cost that comes along with these things where you don't find yourself moving intentionally. Time. Because the longer you wait, the longer it takes for whatever that thing is. There's also the impact in money, which you may not think about. And I've done this myself, where I've been so complacent in a job that I stayed there to the point that I hated it, and I just wanted to accept the first offer that came my way. And so when you do that, you automatically cut yourself down at the negotiation table and cost yourself money then, and then possibly in the future. And then, of course, there's the cost of sanity, of being in a situation or a place in your life where you want to change things or you feel stuck and you want to be able to move, but despite your best efforts and despite everything you try to summon within your confidence, you just can't find yourself making progress. And don't get me wrong, no matter what, there's going to be shitty times, right? We all go through shitty times. But it's easier to maneuver through the manure when you know where you're going. So in 2008, I accepted a job at this staffing agency in Boston. Just before that, I was doing a job in outside sales, and I pretty much looked like Will Smith in Pursuit of Happiness, carrying a freaking first aid kit through the mean streets of Boston. That was my life. And I got to a point where I was tired of the 80-call phone blocks, the showing up at people's businesses and getting no-showed, and all of the rejection and realized I wanted to get closer to my career in human resources. That's what I went to school for. And so I noticed as I started applying for HR jobs, the only messages back I got were the ones to say, you don't have enough experience. But it's an entry-level fucking job. How am I not gonna have enough experience? And so I realized that I would have to take on a stepping stone role. And by that I mean, what position could I take in between to get me closer to where I ultimately wanted to go? And I started thinking about what transferable skills did I have. And having been in sales, you get a lot of them. And I ended up deciding that I would go work at a staffing agency because you're selling candidates to companies and companies to candidates. I also knew that I would be on the phone again, but this position would get me closer to my goal of being an HR generalist. So I end up starting this role, and things are fine for a while, and then I start to get worn down because it's not 2 phone blocks a week, it is 60 to 80 phone calls a day. And I'm an introvert, a hardcore introvert. After I'm done with this talk, I'm gonna go back there and pass out. Yeah, I'm that bad. And so I'd have days where I would go to work dreading getting on the phone, the constant rejection, and there'd be times where I'd be riding home on the subway, foolishness happening in front of me, and I just wouldn't care because I was just so tired. And I had to wear a suit to work. I don't believe in that shit. But it was a very necessary step in terms of me being able to progress in my career, and I remember by the time I got an offer for an HR journalist position for a role in New York City, I was outside of my office in Boston, doubled over against the wall in tears because I thought I was free from what I had experienced for the past 2 years in terms of how exhausting that was to me overall. And so here's another thing. You don't need to love your day job. That whole myth of, oh, you gotta be passionate, all of that stuff, you don't gotta love your day job. It just needs to serve a greater purpose. That's all. And I'll tell you too that it's also fine if you do want a day job and you want to chase money, because maybe you're in a season of your life where chasing money is what you need to get you where you ultimately want to go. So it is okay to chase money. Don't let anyone tell you differently. What's most important is that you have a purpose when you're doing it. And so I get this job in New York. I pack up my life in Boston. I fly down the highway to this apartment where I would become acquainted with bed bugs, roaches, and mice. Shout out to Harlem. That's not all of Harlem. That was just my experience in Harlem. Shout out to the real people from Harlem. But anyway, so I start this job, and I'm working at this prestigious nonprofit that's so hard to get into, and I'm so proud of where I work. It's something that it has purpose, and there's meaning to what we're doing. And then a year later, I get a different manager. Yeah. And then I get assigned some project work that's completely out of my league because I fucking hate spreadsheets. And then I'm getting negative feedback from my manager. And then I'm finding myself walking down this hallway in New York City's old Port Authority building where Google owns many of the floors upstairs, and I'm thinking, I feel just like I did when I was about to leave the staffing agency. Not a very good feeling. And so at that point, I said, you know what? The only time I've ever been able to go upstairs to the Google office is when someone's in town to visit who works for the company. So I ultimately want to work somewhere like that. So I'm going to position myself next by going to a tech startup because I know that's where big companies like this recruit out of, and then that's going to help me land at a place like a Google. And so that happened. I'm sure my manager was happy to see me go. I'm sure the tears that she were crying were actually tears of joy. Because now she was going to be hiring someone who wanted to be there doing the work that they were doing. And I got this job, and I'm like, wow, it's this big pay increase. I feel like I'm coming up. I'm going to be working in-house doing recruiting at this tech startup. Man, I can't wait to tell people about this, post this on the IG, the Twitters, all of them other social media platforms. I was excited about it. And then everything goes fine for a little while. And then I find out, don't ask how, that the person who was in that role before me made 25% more, and they had less experience than I did. Yes. And so I'd run into something called salary compression, and the basic example I give of this is when you've been doing a job for a while, maybe you even get promoted, you get your pay increases year after year, and then someone comes in with less experience making exactly what you make, if not more. And what I hadn't accounted for was that I'd spent 3+ years in the nonprofit industry. And nonprofit pay increases aren't like they are in the private sector, and I found that out the hard way. And so even though I got what seemed like a huge pay increase, it was nowhere close to where I should have been, and there were some mistakes I made along the way because with that job, I let myself stay there to the point that I got desperate, that I accepted the first offer that I got that felt like it was a good decision. But there are some ways to avoid the squeeze, and this is going to sound like really basic stuff. Look every couple of years, and I say this because people are like, oh man, like, I want to be loyalty, I'm not even going to go there. But you look every couple of years because no one says you have to leave. You're just doing market research just like you would for anything else, just like you would for anything that you've probably learned about in some of the other sessions that you've attended. So you owe it to yourself to see what's out there and to see if there is an opportunity for you to maybe go somewhere else. Or maybe you say, hey, there's something out here, and you bring that back to where you work, and then they're giving you a promotion and doing all of that shit that they probably should have did for you in the first place. Second is tracking your work. It sounds super basic, but the more information you have of all of the work that you've done over the years, the people that you've worked with, you've had a positive impression on, those become assets and tools when you get into a performance negotiation conversation. Because a lot of people expect their manager to track their accomplishments, but guess what? Tracking your accomplishments is your responsibility. You don't rely on a manager to remember everything that you've done for the past few years or the past year. I've been in that role myself, and I barely could keep track of what I was doing. And so when you have this information and you go into a performance review conversation, that's the opportunity for you to advocate for yourself. Another use case, you're going on a job interview. You have this list of all of these things that you've done from over the years. That's more information and more opportunities for you to be able to answer questions and show them why they need you to pay you at the highest dollar amount. So make sure you're tracking your work. And if you find yourself in a day job where you're scrambling at the last minute during performance review season, you might want to change that into 2022. Yeah. And then lastly, hold on sharing numbers, and this is a mistake that I've made a few times in the past because you start negotiating with a recruiter, you find yourself in a situation, I don't want to mess things up, blah, 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 blah. You tell them what you made in your last job, or you throw a number out there, and now you're anchored in that number when you get to salary negotiations, and you have to find yourself backtracking a bit. And candidates have a lot more power than we think that we do. And at least as of a few months ago, 21 states have banned employers from asking salary history. Some states have gone a step further and have banned employers from declining candidates who don't want to provide past pay information. And some states have gone a step further and said if a potential employee asks what the pay range is for the role, you have to tell them, or maybe it even has to be posted. And so I ask you to keep that in mind again because of how much power you have. And especially if you're at the point of interviewing with a company or whatever it is, they've obviously shown interest in you. And if you're at the point of getting to an offer, they obviously want to bring you on board. And we talk a lot about creating passive income, but how about creating passive opportunities? So 6 months into my time at this tech startup in New York City, I got an email, or actually a LinkedIn message from a recruiter at Google, and I actually thought it was spam. Even though I had taken that job with the intent of moving to a company like that, it happened so soon that I was like, why would they want me? I mean, they're in California. What could this possibly be? And then that conversation would go on for an additional 6 months, and I'll talk a little bit more about getting that job, but part of the reason they reached out to me is because I had optimized my online presence. And since I'd been a recruiter for years, I knew how to think like a recruiter. And if you're thinking about looking at new day jobs, I encourage you to think like a recruiter as well. Quick tip, when recruiters are looking for candidates on LinkedIn, they're using it just like they would a search engine. So if you know that you want a certain job, you want to make sure that you incorporate some of the most general titles out there somewhere in your profile so that when these recruiters are searching, you pop up. You also want to make sure that you're telling a consistent story between your resume and your LinkedIn profile. So you don't want to have a LinkedIn profile that makes you out to be this amazing project manager, program manager, and then your resume is talking about something completely different. Because as a recruiter, you look at those things and you're like, which person are you? Next. And the importance of follow-up, I would not have ended up at Google if I didn't follow up after the first interview. I remember afterwards, I didn't hear anything for a few weeks, and I was like, oh, I guess I must not have been good enough. Negative self-talk, all of that stuff. And then one day I decided I was going to reach out again and just see what would happen, and it turned out it had nothing to do with me at all. It was some shit that was going on their side where they had to pause things, all of that other foolishness. It had absolutely nothing to do with me. That was just a story that I was telling myself. And so I encourage you, whatever it is, so much money, and you all know this, so much money is left on the table by not following up. And a lot of times when you don't follow up, or you don't follow up, or you follow up the first time and someone doesn't respond. You don't know what the hell is going on in that person's life. So I encourage you, whatever it is that you're looking for, whether it's making a connection, trying to make more money, a job, follow the hell up. And the last thing I'll say on this, as a recruiter, if you're at the point that you're at an offer with a company, the magic words to get that recruiter scrambling, I'll accept this offer today if, and that is the point where you tell them exactly what you want because they are incentivized to go back and get what you want so that you start and they can make whoever that manager is happy. So think like a recruiter. And so I go through this process with Google where I probably have, 12 interviews total. I end up packing my life in New York City to move across the country. And it's great. I mean, I'm working at Google. I mean, it's freaking Google, man. You know, this number one place to work, at least at the time. We have since been passed. But and I realized I'm making more in this role than I made in my last 2 jobs combined. Man, and it's something to be proud of. It's something I can talk to people about. But 5 years later, I'm burnt out. I'm managing a small team. I'm not learning. I feel like I'm just there, a cog in the machine. There are so many things that I'm into, podcasting, blogging, that I don't get to use at work. And then one day I'm talking to a friend and a colleague, and he says, you know what, you'd be good in a communications role. And I say, why do you say that? And he's like, well, think about all the transferable skills you have, man. You've been a freelance writer, you've been podcasting, you've been managing projects, workflows, branding, all of this stuff. And me, thinking I knew it all, at that moment I realized I didn't, and I'm like, you're right. There is a lot of stuff that I can do outside of this world of recruiting. And so my point here is you don't need to leave your company to leave your job. Particularly when you're working at these medium and large-sized companies, people will underestimate the role of internal mobility. And I actually find when you're working internally at a company, it's often the best time to make a career pivot if that's what you want to do, if that's what's in the agenda for you, if that's how you want to leverage this tool. Because there's already a track record of performance. You got better access to hiring managers in the hiring team, and it's less risky versus having to uproot your professional life and go start somewhere else, only to find out that you don't actually like where you work. So if you are thinking about full-time career opportunities still until you reach financial independence, make sure that you're thinking about medium and larger companies, which will allow you the opportunity to be able to move around without leaving. And so I'm in this new role doing communications, and everything's going fine for a while. I'm writing, I'm adding value, I'm learning. Man, I haven't learned in at least a year, and I'm feeling great about things. But then slowly but surely, that feeling returned. I'm quiet in meetings. I'm not feeling like I'm learning. And then one day I have a conversation with my manager, and she tells me about this role in diversity, equity, and inclusion for someone who does career coaching and likes playing the role of an advocate, and it feels like this is the career nirvana position for me. Man, I get to do stuff and talk about things in the podcast like at work. It felt like the dream at the time. But I wouldn't have been able to make that transition for my second career pivot in 3 years if I hadn't identified my transferable skills. And so up to this point, I know I've talked a lot about my progression and some of the lessons that I've learned, and I've also talked about how to use your career as a tool, but if you're not careful, your career can also be a crutch. It can become the reason that you don't take chances and you don't do the things that you say are important to you. For me, my career is why I missed weddings and gatherings. My career is why I was never able to fully put my foot in on my business until now. And my career also became an excuse to drink. So what many people don't know is that through these years where it looks like I'm winning, I'm working at Google, I'm getting these promotions, I'm getting trophies at award shows, behind the scenes at different periods I was struggling a lot. And there were times that I woke up with so much shame at how much I drank the night before that the only solution for me was to drink that much the next day and find myself in another cycle that would go on for years. And so what changed? Well, I gave myself permission to quit on July 1st, 2020, in the midst of the pandemic. And it's no surprise that since making that decision that I've been able to welcome so much abundance into my life, but I also gave myself permission to invest more in myself. And that giving yourself permission really is the first step to breaking whatever cycle it is that's holding you back from where you ultimately want to go. And so what you see is people here who are on my support team, my therapist. We've been going 4 years strong. My leadership coach, who I started working with, part of a mastermind group, accountability partner, I'm actually getting back into competitive track and field shape because I finally have the space in my life again as a result of that decision that I made. So I'm working with a trainer. These are all of the investments that I've made in myself, and the output of this, that business that I wasn't able to put my foot all the way in, I made more in the last year than I made probably in the past 2.5 years for that business combined. I started seeing more success at work. I ended up getting that job that I was telling you about, where I'm now working in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And things were fine for a while, as they normally are. And then I noticed this year, in March, I got that job. A few months later, I started having panic attacks. And then it got to a point where really basic work tasks became difficult to do. And I had to give myself permission a second time to take a mental health leave from work at the beginning of September. I'm actually still on that mental health leave right now. I consider this part of my therapy. And right along with this is the importance of giving yourself permission, but also it's okay to take the time, whether that's from your job, whether it's weighing a decision, whether it's reflecting or doing the work on yourself to get to where you gotta go. It's okay to take your time. These companies, the loyalty, all of that stuff, I know some of us are afraid to use the vacation days that we've actually worked for. It is okay to take that. It is okay to take that. And it's interesting because we talk so much about freedom, but I'll tell you a little something about freedom that I learned by having time alone with my thoughts, because that's what it's been probably for the past 10 to 12 weeks. And I realized that a lot of these career moves had absolutely nothing to do with my career satisfaction. It was things that had gone unaddressed for most of my life. And I realized that for much of my career, I actually hadn't been running to something, I had been running from something. And I believe a lot of times that we work so hard and we stay busy because we don't want to confront those things that are deep in the back of our mind. And we know that if we have enough time with ourselves, we'll have to hear all of that negative self-talk. So when you think about freedom and what that means, that's part of it too. It's not just being out on a beach. It's not just having vacations and all of these other things. But what I learned from this time has been impactful, and what I've been able to accept has been especially impactful. I had to accept that I'm a childhood survivor of sexual and physical assault. I recently learned during this time off that I've had PTSD for most of my life and didn't even know it. And I've learned all sorts of other stuff along the way that I've had to come to terms with to finally free myself and actually start making the progress that I want to make, because throughout all of these different moves, I found out I kept getting what I wanted and I still wasn't happy. And so I look at where I'm at now on this stage, 11 weeks into this leave, just rebranded my podcast from Paychecks and Balances to the Mental Wealth Show, go figure. And I'm on this stage talking to you because and I'm on this stage talking to you because, like I said earlier, I've learned no dollar amount, job title, promotion, award, trophy is going to bring you that freedom and happiness. In fact, those are all just Band-Aids. And so if you really want freedom, if you really want to live a life where it's not just about the things and you don't find yourself in a position where you're constantly saying, man, I keep getting what I want and I'm still not happy, then I encourage you to strengthen your core. Thank you.